Hello students, I'm Dr. Salha Jamal, Faculty Department of Geography, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. So welcome back for today's class. So now we are going to discuss today biosphere as we have completed the other spheres of the earth, that is lithosphere, hydrosphere and atmosphere. Now we are going to deal with the biosphere. Biosphere is made up of word bio, which means life. That's why biosphere is known as life supporting stratum, where life can exist. So it is a region that encompasses all living organisms, maybe the flora, fauna, the bacteria, and the abiotic factors from which these living organisms derive energy and nutrients. As I have said, bio means life and it is a life supporting one. So first time this word was coined by the Russian scientist Vladimir Vansky in the year 1920s. So it is mainly characterized by an area containing all living organisms, and I can say that also it encompasses the products of their activities. In summary, I can say that the biosphere play a very important role in the maintenance of the ecosystems as it provide various habitats for the different species. It also play a very important role for climate regulation. Now, while studying biosphere, you should have a clear knowledge, the basic knowledge about the components of the biosphere. When I have said it encompasses all living organism, means its first most component encompasses the living organism, which is known as biota, and it also encompasses all the other factors from which this living organism derive their nutrients, energy, and also the byproduct of their activity. So it also encompasses the components atmosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere. Now, dealing with the living organism, that is biota, that mainly includes, you can see here, the plants, animals and microorganism. While when we talk about the atmosphere, already we have finished in the previous lecture, it is the layer of gases which surrounds our earth, and it is very important because it provides us with various gases like oxygen, life supporting gas, carbon dioxide, which is mainly used by the plants for the photosynthesis, nitrogen, etc. Then another sphere, that is hydrosphere. Hydrosphere, whenever the word hydro comes, it means something related to the water. Hydrosphere, that is a sphere or stratum of water. It includes all the water bodies, whether oceans, rivers, lakes, and groundwater, and also it includes the water in solid states, maybe in the form of glaciers, ice caps, etc. This sphere supports the aquatic life, and also it helps very much in regulating the climate of the planet Earth. Another major important component of biosphere is lithosphere. Already we have finished in the previous lectures. If you remember, students, this is the Earth's solid outer layer comprising of soil and rocks, and it generally provides all the minerals, nutrients, and the habitats for the terrestrial organism. So these are the important components of the biosphere. When it is said that biosphere consists of all the living organisms, that is the biotic components, and non-living aspects, that is the abiotic components. So its components can be further categorized into biotic components and abiotic components. Biotic components that comprise of producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers which produce their own food. For example, plants, algae, and many of the bacteria produce their own food through the process of photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. Chemosynthesis means mainly the organism which produce their food from the chemical energy in spite of using sunlight as the energy source. These mainly forms the base of the food chain. Another component of the biotic aspect, that is consumers, which comprise of animals, insects and humans that rely on the other organisms for the food. And it can be classified into herbivores, carnivores and omnivores. The third component is decomposers, mainly comprise of fungi, bacteria, and other organisms which break down the dead organic matter, thus recycling nutrients back into the ecosystem. So overall, biotic components comprise of producers, consumers, and decomposers. And the abiotic components comprise of the non-living things, for example, the atmosphere, hydrosphere, and lithosphere. And as we have already discussed, that atmosphere contains gases like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen, which is very much essential for supporting life for the respiration purpose, for the photosynthesis. Similarly, hydrosphere, which includes ocean, rivers, lakes, and groundwater, they support the aquatic life and also regulate the temperature of this planet Earth. And the third component, that the soils and minerals, that is regarded as lithosphere, they provide nutrients, minerals, and foundation for the plants and organisms. So overall, air, water, soil, and minerals, these comprise the abiotic components of the biosphere. This is a diagrammatic representation. Here you can see when we say the biotic components, it comprise of producers, consumers, and decomposers. And when we talk about the abiotic components, it comprises of rock and minerals, air, water, soil, and climate. So these are the biotic and abiotic components of the biosphere. While studying biospheres, how the energy, how the nutrients flow in the biosphere, that is very much important to understand. For this, we have to understand the trophic levels available in the atmosphere. There are four major trophic levels which we have to study here. The first trophic level is of primary producers. Producers always means which produce their own food either through the photosynthesis or chemosynthesis and comprise of plants, algae, phytoplanktons, etc. So they produce food on their own. And generally, about 100% of the solar energy which the producers capture is stored as the biomass, and they provide these nutrients and energy to all the organisms in the ecosystem. The second trophic level, that comprise of the primary consumers, in particularly we can call it herbivores depending upon the first trophic levels, that is primary producers. The organisms like animals like deer, rabbit, zooplanktons that feed on the plants and algae are the herbivores. And when we talk about this function, it is but obvious they help to regulate the plant population. If there would be no herbivore, there will be erratic distribution of the plant population, or even the plant population will boom. And that's why its function, the functions of the second trophic level, that primary consumers, is to help to regulate the plant population and contribute to nutrient cycle. And when we see the energy transfer in the herbivores, or can say primary consumers, they obtain about only 10% of the energy that is generally stored by the producers, as only a small fraction of energy is passed to them. From the 100%, only 10% of energy passed to them. Talking about the third trophic level, that is secondary consumers, which consist of carnivores and omnivores, animals like wolves, birds, prey, and omnivores like bears that feed on these primary consumers. So similarly, like how these primary consumers regulate the population of the plants, in the similar way, these secondary consumers, the carnivores and the omnivores, they control the population of the herbivores and help to maintain the ecosystem balance. So omnivores feed on both plants and animals, and many times affecting multiple levels of the food web. And when we talk about in the terms of the energy transfer, only 1% of the original energy from the producers is passed to the secondary consumers. Talking about the fourth trophic level, that is tertiary consumers, organisms like carnivores feed on the secondary consumers, and such as large predators like lions, sharks, and eagles are examples of tertiary consumers. And in the similar way, they play function in regulating the population of the secondary consumers and helping to maintain the balance in the ecosystem. So if we see the energy transfer, only 0.1% of the original energy from the producers is passed to the tertiary consumers due to the 10% rule. So what we have seen here, in first tropic level, we have the producers. In second tropic level, we have the primary consumers, which depends upon the producers. And then we have the third trophic level consisting of secondary consumers, which again depends upon the primary consumers. And at fourth trophic level, we have tertiary consumers, which again depend upon the secondary consumers. Like this, they maintain balance in the ecosystem, and transfer of energy also take place in different proportion from producers to the tertiary consumers. This transfer of energy, if we will observe, you must have seen that the producers store 100% of energy as the biomass, and these producers transfers the only 10% their original energy to the primary consumers, and again only 1% to the secondary consumers, and only 0.1% to the tertiary consumers. So you can see here that 10% rule of energy transfer can be observed. So this rule of energy transfer across the trophic level was given by Lindman, that is known as 10% law in 1942. According to this law, it states that 10% of the energy in food out of the total energy is transferred from one trophic level to another trophic level. Now, what are the importance of this trophic level? Because what we have seen that mainly it maintains the balance in the ecosystem, because the producers depends upon first trophic, second trophic level, and the primary consumers depends upon the secondary consumers. The secondary consumers, the tertiary consumers depends upon the secondary consumers. So overall, what we have seen through this, we can say that a balance of population of producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers have been maintained by this trophic level system. Secondly, it also helps in energy transfers, because we have seen the transfer of energy with 10% rule. The energy moves through the ecosystem. Population is controlled because it is regulated by the species population. Also, we have seen the nutrient recycling, because this trophic level supports nutrient cycling in ecosystem through the transfer of energy and through the transfer of nutrients. Not only this, the trophic level also promotes species diversity and ecosystem stability. Overall, it helps to manage the resource sustainability. So these are the few of the importance of the trophic levels. As we have said that biosphere consists of all living organism. So all living organism, here we are talking about different types of living organisms, their variety and variability of life on earth. So it's become very much important to study about the biodiversity. When we discuss about the biodiversity simply means variety and variability of life on the earth. And there are three types of biodiversity: genetic biodiversity, you can see here, species biodiversity, and ecosystem biodiversity. When we talk about genetic biodiversity, it is differences in the genes within a species. We are talking here about that, suppose a specific species, so there are various differences we are talking about here within the species, that is formation of individuals differing in genotypes. So it helps in to adapt the changes. So just remember, whenever we talk about genetic diversity, it means we are talking about the differences in genes within a species. Second type of biodiversity is species diversity. Here, variety of different species in an area is considered. Suppose we are having the area, so variety of species. We are talking about not only the differences in the single species, genetic differences, but here we are talking about the variety of species in an area which reflects species richness and species evenness. Richness that highlights the number of species we are talking about, means different species we are talking about, and species evenness talks about how common or rare species are in community. Overall, it supports the ecosystem health. The third type of biodiversity is ecosystem diversity. We are talking about the ecosystem that comprises of the overall organism that interacts with their habitat or the surrounding environment. So it reflects different ecosystems, maybe in terms of forest ecosystem, desert ecosystem, marine ecosystem of a region. And it provides, what is the function of the ecosystem? The first and foremost important function of the ecosystem, that it provides different types of habitat for different types of life forms. So overall, we have three types of biodiversity: genetic biodiversity, species biodiversity, and ecosystem biodiversity. This is a diagrammatic representation. You can see here we are having the three type of biodiversity: species, genetic, and ecosystem biodiversity. When we talk about the species biodiversity, we talk about the different species in an area which reflects species richness and evenness. Richness in terms of, you can see the species richness, the best examples in the tropical rainforest or even on the coral reefs. Genetic diversity that consists of genetic variation. Genetic variation can be clearly seen in crop varieties, wild population, and ecosystem diversity, which provide habitat for the life forms, consist of different types of habitat: forest, grasslands, wetlands, deserts, etc. So, what are the factors that influence the biodiversity? So there are some factors which influence the biodiversity. Some are anthropogenic factors, that is due to the human activities, and some are the natural factors that the inbuilt in our nature. So that those are the environmental factors. If we see the environmental factors, how the climate affects the biodiversity, you may see the wet, warm, and humid climate. So warm and humid climate is very much conducive for more diversity than the dry regions. And similarly, the areas with the distinctive seasons that also support the variety of the species. For example, if I'm talking about the agricultural practices in India, India is blessed with the two type of climatic condition, that is tropical and subtropical climatic condition. So we are having the variety of crops which we can grow in tropical conditions and subtropical conditions. In the similar way, areas with distinctive seasons that support varied species. If we talk about the geography like topography, how it affects the biodiversity, the mountains, the water bodies, these generally isolate the species and affects the distribution of species. See, in the similar way, if we talk about the latitude, biodiversity generally increases towards or closer to the equator, because there we get seasonal variability and also the warm and humid climatic condition, which is conducive for the richness in the biodiversity. Soil composition, different types of soil support different plants, which affects animal life. Now coming to the human activities which affects biodiversity, the urbanization, it is but obvious. City expansion destroys generally the habitats and also isolates the species. If we increase the built up area on cost of the different ecosystem like aquatic ecosystem, terrestrial ecosystem, so it is but obvious that this expansion in the build up will destroy the habitats, and in turn there will be the effect will be seen on the biodiversity. Now coming to the agricultural practices, monoculture If we talk about the monoculture, that is pesticide reduce genetic diversity and also harms the ecosystem. Deforestation, cutting down the forest trees, leads to the habitat lost for many of the species, thus reducing the biodiversity. In the similar manner, if we're talking about the pollution, chemicals in the air, water, soil harm species and reduce biodiversity. And we're talking about the climate change. The global warming shifts habitats, making it hard for some species to survive. So these are the few of the factors which influences biodiversity. Now, what are the global patterns of biodiversity? What are the different types of distribution we can observe on this planet Earth? So, talking about the tropical regions, we know that the tropical regions are generally blessed with the warm climatic conditions, humid climatic conditions, so they are having the most biodiverse ecosystem. The best examples are the tropical rainforest, Amazon, Coral Triangle. This all can be found in the tropical regions. So actually, this tropical region exhibits a high species richness because of warm temperature and high rainfall, which support diverse plants and animals. uh, Secondly, the temperate regions that are mainly identified on the basis of seasonal variations. They have the distinct seasons, which also allows moderate to high biodiversity. Example, deciduous forest, grasslands have various species adapted to the seasonal changes. If we are talking about the polar regions, mainly the temperature is too low, which is not very conducive for the expansion of the biodiversity. So this extreme cold and limited resource leads to the lower biodiversity. For example, you can take the polar bears, seals. These are generally adapted to the harsh condition, but nowadays, due to the climatic changes, they are also facing several threats to the climate change. Lastly, the islands. When we talk about the islands, something comes that is in isolation because the connectivity is broken and as it is surrounded by the water from all its sides. So, isolation leads to the unique biodiversity and many of the species that are generally not found else either in the different land areas. So, these are the global patterns of biodiversity. Now, what are the roles of the biosphere in supporting the life? Because biosphere is what? This is the stratum which supports life. So, how it supports life? Biosphere, if we talk about the biosphere, as we know, it consists of lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere. So, we can say it supports the ecosystem, means it provides different habitats for different species and also maintains the energy flow and nutrient cycles in various means. It also helps in climatic adaptation as it comprises of the atmosphere having carbon dioxide. It helps to regulate the climate by absorbing carbon dioxide and also to mitigate the climate change, helping the ecosystems to adapt. Not only this, it also helps in biosphere reserves. It protects biodiversity by providing different situations and conditions and ecosystems. Overall, I can say the habitats while promoting sustainable resource use and research on conservation. It also improves the soil health. It enhances the soil fertility through organic matter decomposition and nutrient cycle, thus supporting agriculture. Not only this, it also helps in water cycle regulation. Already we have studied the hydrological cycle. It contributes to the precipitation, water purification, ground recharge for the ecosystem health. Overall, it helps in the sustainable human development because it provide varied resources and ecosystem services, which is very much important for food security, clean water, and economic stability. So overall, these are the roles of the biosphere role in life, supporting ecosystem, supporting climate adaptation, helps to for the biosphere reserves, also controls the climatic phenomena in various ways, helps in water cycle through the precipitation, groundwater recharge, etc., promotes the soil health, etc. Now, types of ecosystems in the biosphere. When we have studied the types of biosphere, types of biodiversity, it becomes important to study the types of ecosystems which are present in the biosphere. So generally we have two major ecosystems, that is the terrestrial ecosystem and the aquatic ecosystem. Talking about the terrestrial ecosystem, which consists of forest, grassland, and the deserts. Talking about the forest, we have different types of forest in different climatic condition. We have the tropical rainforest, temperate rainforest, and boreal forest, which provide a diverse habitat for the different species. Not only this, it helps very much to regulate the climate, and also it is known as the carbon sink of the earth. Talking about the grasslands, we have different types of grassland. Temperate grasslands like prairies of America. Then we can talk about the tropical grassland like savannas, which supports these grasslands supports herbivores and the predators, thus contribute to the soil formation and grazing. Talking about the deserts, we have hot deserts as well as cold deserts like Sahara, that is a hot desert, Gobi desert, cold desert, and which includes unique species that is adapted to these extreme conditions of the deserts, whether it is cold desert or whether it is hot desert. After studying the terrestrial ecosystem, we are going to deal with the aquatic ecosystem. Aquatic ecosystem, we are dealing with the ecosystem that flourishes in the water environment or hydrospheric environment. It consists of two types of hydrospheric environment, that is freshwater environment, fresh water ecosystem, and marine water ecosystem. Freshwater ecosystem includes rivers, lakes, ponds, and the wetlands, and they provide habitats for fish and invertebrates, which are very much important for freshwater supply. The marine ecosystem, which consists of the oceans, coral reefs, and estuaries, these generally cover almost 71% of the earth and supports the rich biodiversity and also help very much to regulate the global climate, which we have studied in the spheres of the earth in hydrosphere part, students. So these are the two major ecosystem, terrestrial ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem. Terrestrial ecosystem comprising of forest, grassland, deserts, tundras, and aquatic ecosystem comprising of freshwater ecosystem and marine ecosystem. Now, while studying this, we have to also deal with the several types of biogeochemical cycles which exist in the biosphere. The processes takes place in the biosphere. Actually, the biogeochemical is the contraction of the biological, geological, and chemical cycles. So here we are dealing with the different types of biogeochemical cycle processes which can be found in the biosphere. So few of them like carbon cycle, if we see with the carbon cycle, that is plants generally capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and convert it into organic matter using sunlight. And when they use carbon dioxide in the presence of the sunlight for producing food, for producing organic matter, that process is known as photosynthesis. That's why the in the trophic level, the plants which produce their own food, they lie at first trophic level and they capture 100% of the energy and store it at biomass. Then during the respiration, whether we are talking about the different organism, we release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere by breaking down organic matter for the energy purpose. So during the respiration, carbon dioxide is released back to the atmosphere. In photosynthesis, it is used from the atmosphere, and in respiration, it is released back to the atmosphere. Talking about the decomposition, mainly take place with the help of the decomposers, which break down the dead materials, and during this breakdown, carbon dioxide and the nutrients is again released to the environment. So we can see releasing of carbon dioxide and the nutrients to the environment in decomposition. If we talk about the combustion, burning fossil fuels, biomass, releases carbon dioxide, contributing to the climate change. Already we know that the burning of the fossil fuels play a very important role in the climate change because of the release of the greenhouse gases. So during the combustion, carbon dioxide is released back to the atmosphere. And if we talk about the carbon sequestration, that is, carbon is stored by the forest, by the oceans, by the fossil fuels, helping to reduce the atmospheric carbon dioxide. So if you see, students, during the photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is used. During the respiration, it is released. If you see, during the decomposition, again it is released. During the combustion, again it is released. And during the carbon sequestration, it is stored, or you can say used. So this is how it maintains the carbon cycle in the biosphere. Now, talking about this, you have seen the several processes which involves in the carbon cycle. Already we have discussed, that is photosynthesis, respiration, decomposition, combustion, and carbon sequestration. Now, another important biogeochemical cycle is nitrogen cycle. Now, how the nitrogen cycle is maintained in the biosphere, again, it comprises of the several processes, like the important process, that is the nitrogen fixation. Actually, the bacteria, the plants convert the nitrogen of the atmosphere with the help of the bacteria into ammonia. So here the nitrogen of the atmosphere is converted into ammonia with the help of the bacteria. The process is known as nitrification. Here the bacteria converts ammonia into nitrites and nitrates, which the plants can absorb. Plants cannot take nitrogen directly. They have to convert it into the usable form, that is converting the nitrogen in ammonia, and with the help of the bacteria, they convert it into nitrites and nitrates, which now the plants can absorb. So here they are taking the nitrogen by converting it into nitrite and nitrate. Now, the second process is assimilation. The plants absorb nitrates. Now, the animals obtain nitrogen by eating plants or other animals. So, again, you can see here how it is transferred from the plants to the animals. The process is known as assimilation. Then there is a process known as ammonification. The decomposers convert the organic nitrogen from the dead organism into ammonia, and again it is returned back to the soil. So once it is used from the atmosphere by the plants in form of nitrates and nitrites, then again it is by eating these plants, it is transferred to the animals. Then the decomposers, they convert this organic nitrogen from the dead organism, then again it is returned to the soil in the form of ammonia. And finally the process denitrification, where again the bacteria converts the nitrates back into the nitrogen, that is the nitrates back into the nitrogen gas, releasing it into the atmosphere and completing the cycle. So here you can see how the nitrogen cycle is maintained in the biosphere. Now, what are the climate change and the biosphere? If we're talking about the climate change and the biosphere, how both these things are related, then we can see the rising temperatures, how it affects in form of the habitat shifts takes place. Generally, the species move to the cooler areas, causing habitat loss. The best example you can coin here for the polar bears who are losing the sea ice. Not only this, migration pattern also changes. Early migration takes place, which lead to the mismatches with the food availability. Example for the birds and the insects. Not only this, due to the climate change, we can observe several extreme weather events like storms. Nowadays, the storms are stronger hurricanes, cyclones, which damages the ecosystem like coral reefs and mangroves. Even the prolonged droughts leads to the desertification and also threaten agriculture and species survival. Another repercussion of the climate change, that is the ocean acidification. Mostly the coral reefs are affected by it. These acidified oceans generally hinder the coral growth, causing bleaching. That is known as coral bleaching, very much common in Great Barrier Reef. What is coral bleaching? When the temperature, when carbon dioxide increases, global warming happens, the temperature of the water rises, and even the acidification of water takes place. What does the coral polyps do? They expel the tissue, we can say algae, which survives in their tissue, thus turning their color white, which is known as coral bleaching, thus becoming more vulnerable to the climatic changes. So it also affects the marine life, like shell building organisms are mainly affected and disrupting the marine food web. Several species are also even threatened by the climate change, like through the storms, loss of sea ice is taking place, which reduces the hunting grounds. With the droughts, fishes migrates to the cooler waters, which disrupt the ecosystem and the fisheries. So that's all for this lecture. Have a nice day. Thank you.